Today I want to be exposing the 1,573 massive multi-billion institutions who were just quietly revealed to be buying Bitcoin. I wish I was joking, but I'm not. You guys can see the chart of the parabolic number of SEC filings that were mentioning the name of Bitcoin. And friend of the channel, Sam Callahan, ran the numbers and he dug through hundreds of pages of S13 filings, and by his count, he found that 1,573 institutions had long exposure to Bitcoin in late 2024. So today I'm going to be exposing all of this with my good buddy and partner in crime, Brandon Keys from Green Candle. Welcome, Brandon.
What's going on, Luke? I think everything that you're lining out here is just what people have been waiting for at this entire time. The FASB and that ruling that Michael Saylor and Strategy, now not Micro, just Strategy, have been lining out for years. Everybody's been licking their chops, just waiting to get themselves some Bitcoin on the balance sheet. So I think it's just been a matter of time, and we're seeing the FOMO really start to come out here.
Couldn't agree more, dude. I mean, we have a lot of banks FOMOing into Bitcoin. I do want to pull up our sneaky little bit of investigative work that was done by Sam Callahan, and he has a ton of receipts here for the exact numbers of who was actually exposed for buying Bitcoin. One of these most popular entities that were exposed for buying Bitcoin was Abu Dhabi. Before we get into the new banks who we're about to expose, any quick thoughts on the sovereign wealth fund of Abu Dhabi buying a little bit of Bitcoin recently?
Hey, there's been rumors ever since Bitcoin Mina that Abu Dhabi and some country in the Middle East was buying Bitcoin. And they said, David Bailey came out and said, we know that they're buying Bitcoin, but they're just not quite ready to announce it just yet. So there's been rumblings that these nation states in the Middle East, who have been very forward thinking for quite some time, have been buying Bitcoin. So to me, it's no surprise. Everybody is seeing MicroStrategy make these headlines and just outperform every single stock basically in the NASDAQ at this point. And what is MicroStrategy, or Strategy now as they call it, as Michael Saylor has now rebranded? It's essentially a Bitcoin proxy, a little bit of a levered play on Bitcoin. So all of these companies are taking notes. I think billionaires don't like to get their tail whipped, so to speak. So I think that they're getting a little competitive here, and it's just par for the course, Luke. I think everybody is looking at the winning strategy, and that includes Bitcoin, to say the very least.
Well, I want to quickly whip through 5 of the largest holders who have been exposed in this tweet thread by Sam Callahan. I'm going to keep it quick, short, sharp, and we're going to not fluff around too much, but I want to show you guys some quick numbers and some quick maths. So the biggest holder who was recently exposed was Horizon Kinetics. You can see they have 16.16% of their fund allocated to Bitcoin, which is $1.3 billion worth of exposure. But they're not the only ones who are also recently exposed. We have Bridge Capital. They have 23.6% of their fund exposed to Bitcoin, which is $334 million worth of buys. We have a couple of others. Of course, we have Paul Tudor Jones. He has 1% of his massive investment fund allocated into Bitcoin. This represents about $436 million worth of exposure. Let's continue on. I'm not done yet. We have the 4th largest position is held by Fortress Investment Group. They've got 11% of their capital allocated to Bitcoin, $70 million worth of exposure. And we do have a few other very large banks that I do want to get into a little bit later. But Brandon, I want to kick it back over to you with this one right here. Number 9 on the list, we have State of Wisconsin and their pension board. We can see what's really interesting is they're continuing to buy more and more and more and more Bitcoin. The big news here is that this state pension fund has more than tripled its Bitcoin position from the last quarter. So Brandon, what do you think about a couple of the names I listed off there? And what do you think of what is happening in the institutional space?
Yeah, so in the institutional space, we saw a lot of institutions double up on Bitcoin and on MicroStrategy in Q4. Now, what also happened in Q4, Luke? We saw Bitcoin rise from 60K maybe-ish in October to hitting the all-time high at 105 at that time, right? So that's more than a 50% increase. So to me, that means they're seeing the writing on the wall. They're seeing the FOMO of institutions start to come in where they're saying, hey, when we see Bitcoin's price run up, we know that we're going to do well here. So we need to shoot more of our liquidity into Bitcoin because hammer the winners. And so I think the likes of the Wisconsin Pension Fund are looking at, hey, we don't want to put our reserves in cheese anymore, which they so famously love up in Wisconsin. We want to put it on that orange coin and put it in Bitcoin. And so they're tripling down on their position. And I think more and more companies, pension funds, and everybody else, for example, is going to start to double and triple and maybe even quadruple down. And when we see Bitcoin's price start to run up, that's when we're going to see these quarterly reports run out and say, hey, all these people were buying Bitcoin in the background. We just didn't know it just yet. And so I think that's the interesting part is we're seeing all these people slowly trickle into Bitcoin, then all of a sudden double and triple on up. And then we see Bitcoin's price reflected in that. And so it seems to make sense now looking back at the data, as we love to say here, show me the data. We're seeing everybody buy and smash buy more and more Bitcoin. And I think it's just a matter of time before everybody drops everything else and the only investment is in Bitcoin.
I couldn't agree more. You make a really good point about the doubling and the tripling up, because this is what I think we're beginning to see now with this exponential rise that we are seeing in the number of S13 filings with the mention of Bitcoin in it. We're seeing parabolic growth. That's why I use that chart for today's thumbnail. And again, we've seen whispers of this coming for a little while. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, all of these big boys have been quietly but slowly really starting to flood into the Bitcoin space. Even recently, Brandon and I have both done videos on the $6 trillion giant State Street and Citibank that launched Bitcoin and crypto custody. It really does look very clear to most people that the big boys are really starting to come into the space and they're not slowing down. It looks as if they are slowly but surely increasing their holdings. Again, I like this article here. Goldman Sachs doubles down on Bitcoin ETF holdings, increasing their holdings by 120%. I think what we're beginning to see is these banks and these billionaires slowly but surely realize that once you dip your toes into the Bitcoin market, that is just the beginning. I do think it's actually more difficult to go from a 0% allocation to a 1% allocation than it is to go from a 1% allocation to a 10% allocation. Once you've gotten off zero, you've done the hard work. You've gotten a little bit of a taste of the number go up technology. You've gotten yourself over a lot of the mental barriers, the propaganda, the BS, the FUD that stops people from buying Bitcoin and being stuck on that big fat zero of a 0% Bitcoin holding. But I think doing that kind of shift, we're watching it unfold pretty quickly that these institutions are now not afraid to increase their Bitcoin holdings in a pretty big way. What are your thoughts on that, Brandon?
I agree 100% with you, Luke. And I think the interesting part, too, is that these two rulings came fairly closely. And I'm talking about the FASB and the SAB 121. So the SAB 121 allows banks to custody Bitcoin. And I think the interesting part about what Citibank did is that they're outsourcing it to another company. I believe it's in Singapore for helping their customers custody Bitcoin. And it's been a ruling that, or it was a company that's been around and been in the space for, I believe, 5 to 6 years. So has had some experience in that realm. And what does that mean? It means that their customers are really demanding that a customer or a bank like Citibank is going to custody their Bitcoin fairly quickly. Citibank does not want to spend the time and resources in order to get this up and running because they're thinking they're leaving money on the table. So they're seeing all of the rush to get into Bitcoin, whether it's from the retail space, whether it's from the businesses and everything else. And I also think it's interesting that a lot of these players are avoiding Coinbase, an American-based company, in order to custody their funds. And so they're diversifying out, and they're looking at this as a way to try to emulate their Bitcoin holdings faster than ever. So these two rulings, the FASB and the SAB 121, have really flipped the entire industry on the head, where we're seeing businesses, thousands, flock to get Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And then we're also seeing banks rush to be able to custody their Bitcoins because, hey, they know that big motto in the Bitcoin, in the crypto industry to a lesser extent, is debank yourself. Well, they're like, hey, slow it down here, folks. We can custody your Bitcoin for you. So let us help you out. So they're moving quickly because they're seeing they're losing customers. They're losing money. So they want to bring them back as quickly as possible. And it's because of the movement of people like you and I here, Luke. It's a movement of the plebs and a movement of the big money. They're seeing, hey, my mom who forgot her Coinbase password or forgot her private keys or whatever it was, hasn't checked it for years because they forgot they bought Bitcoin. They're absolutely crushing these money managers. And so I think it's just a matter of time before everybody starts to get towards Bitcoin. And we're seeing it start to slowly unfold. But that slowly unfolding is turning into a rapid unfolding very quickly.
I'm surprised nobody didn't debank you earlier, Brandon. Imagine giving you a bank account. Be brave. Anyway, I do think it's really interesting. People are getting debanked all around the world. There is a new advertisement for Bitcoin every single day. You mentioned Coinbase. Well, I've got something to show the guys about Coinbase that I find a little bit interesting. Very, let's call it curious, or let's maybe even just pop the tinfoil hats on for a minute. There we go. Look at that. We got a beard scratch out of the boy from downstairs. Something that I think is a little bit interesting is the fact that the SEC recently let Coinbase walk. The SEC dismissed all enforcement cases against Coinbase. So again, we covered that in a different video. We're not going to rehash all of that again. But what I will say is I think that's a little bit interesting. I think that's a little bit, how do we say it? Coincidental. What else I think is really interesting is the fact that most of the big banks are balls deep into Bitcoin. If we zoom on in, we can see Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, BNY Mellon, my former bank, Commonwealth Bank, the largest bank in Australia, Citibank, HSBC, Wells Fargo. You guys get the drill. A lot of big household name banks already have been making these moves into Bitcoin. And I think the most recent chart that I found here really kind of showing how exponential the growth is becoming. Really kind of put things into perspective for me. I didn't realize that just so many of these institutions were as balls deep into Bitcoin as what has been recently revealed. We even have even smaller pension funds pivoting back to this mega tweet thread that we began unraveling for you guys at the beginning of today's live stream. We can see other retirement systems like the state of Michigan's retirement system is also slowly but surely nearly doubling its Bitcoin position each quarter. You guys can see what Sam said, but Wisconsin wasn't alone. The Michigan State Pension Fund almost doubled its Bitcoin position. So we're seeing this FOMO really start to pick up in a big way. That's what's making me really pay attention to what is going on with these institutions. To give you guys some more color about these 1,573 institutions that Sam exposed in this very lengthy but very good tweet thread, was that they had to be bigger than $100 million of assets under management. So let's read this disclaimer here. Sam says, every quarter, large investment firms with more than $100 million of assets under management must submit one of these 13F filings to the SEC, disclosing all of their positions, which include stocks and equity-related assets such as ETFs and REITs, as well as convertible bonds and options. So this means that we only really found this stuff out. We only found out that these whales with more than $100 million worth of assets under management were quietly going balls deep into Bitcoin because it is something they have to disclose every quarter. So again, it's something that we've kind of seen accelerate recently. Maybe, just maybe in the next quarter, things are going to get even more wild. Maybe, just maybe, we're going to see more parabolic growth on this chart here in the big green lines of, 13F filings mentioning the word Bitcoin in it. But maybe, just maybe, we're just at the beginning of a bull run. What do you think, Brandon? How do you anticipate that all of this FOMO might evolve throughout the rest of what we both believe is still a bull market today in February 2024?
Luke, I don't know how we could say it's not a bull market at this point. I mean, we've seen the year-to-date growth of Bitcoin maybe around 4 to 5%, and everybody's freaking out because we just had a huge November and December. And what happened then? We're seeing all the filings come now that everybody was doubling and tripling their Bitcoin holdings. So we see it here. The price action reflects, hey, in November, Q4, that's when everybody was buying, folks. So I think that this is just a tall tale sign of the FOMO market. We're seeing more money on the sidelines than we have ever seen in Bitcoin's history, simply because of the access. We have the Bitcoin ETFs. We have now the micro strategies of the world. We have the FASB ruling. We have the SAB 121. I mean, how could you not be bullish with all this news here? Everybody was calling for some regulatory clarity around some little things here and there, right? And Bitcoin is allowing these businesses to simply not be afraid to hammer the winners. And I think that's what the good investment managers always seem to do. Hammer the winners. If you see something that is significantly outperforming, why are you going to sell on that stock? Why are you going to sell on that investment strategy? Well, it seems like everybody's realizing Bitcoin is the true winner. So double, triple, quadruple down. We're seeing all the pension funds come from out the woodwork and start to allocate more and more of their percentage of their portfolio towards Bitcoin. And they actually want, there are people that are going to be receiving this pension fund to eventually retire. It's a novel concept. I can't believe it either, Luke. But I think, we're seeing all of these businesses, all of these pension funds, as you said, go balls deep because the water ain't too cold. The water actually feels pretty good. We don't have to worry about the shriveling up here, Luke. So everybody's going balls deep in the hot tub and feeling just dandy because the water is at a perfect temperature and everybody's joining in the Bitcoin pool party.
I tend to agree. I tell you what, I hope there's not a lot of shriveling up going on. Jesus, you've thrown me off my game here, Brandon. What I will say though is you mentioned some really good things about Q4 2024. We can see what the price did. So this might explain why we've seen so many of these new filings, because we can see the price went parabolic in Q4 2024. I mean, that's as obvious as you can see. Bitcoin rallied from 60K to 110K in a quarter. And I think this is why we have seen the ridiculous amount of growth in SEC filings that contain the words Bitcoin. This could be a little bit of an explanation. So great stuff there on bringing up the price of Bitcoin there, Brandon. That did get me back on track. All Night Hider in the chat says shrinkage is a buying opportunity. I tend to agree with that one. And Rock VTM, nice partner show. Yeah, we might pull out the partner show from time to time for you guys. Rock, let me know in the chat down below whether I should bring on this stinky Greek from time to time. I do see some comments in here about facial hair. And believe it or not, I reckon I could embarrass this Greek I've got on the show with me with a better beard than Brandon. Phil here says, Luke is like me. He can only grow hair on his upper lip and chin. What do you think, Brandon? Is that true? Is that accurate? You've seen me in the flesh.
I think this guy just likes to throw shaving cream on his face and shave some stuff just for the hell of it, because this guy shaves his face literally 2 times a day. I don't see a hair growing anywhere on his body. The guy just loves to use the razor and shaving cream. So I don't know, you guys. I mean, it seems to be working because the guy doesn't look like he has any hair on his body at any time. So maybe he could grow some, maybe not. I, for one, don't believe it, as I've been living with him for 3 months and I haven't seen a hair on his body yet.
Hey, you know what they say, mate? You got to be cleanly shaved. What were you talking about a second ago? The winners? You were talking about the winners. And what did you say? You got to bang the winners. I can't remember exactly what you said, but
yeah, you got to hammer the winners, Luke. So that's what all the good money managers do, right? They see something that is significantly outperforming everything else. And so why pull back on that position? Because you have to allocate some arbitrary percentage, that 2 to 5% that Larry Fink was talking about sovereign wealth funds going after. Well, if that 5% doubles and everything else doesn't, then that 5% will maybe turn into that 10%, right? And why would you sell Bitcoin just to keep that 5% holding at that point, right? You would probably want to allocate more towards Bitcoin. And I think that's what we're going to start to see is like more of these investment firms and everybody else is going to start to keep hammering those winners, Luke. And, you know, when you got a winner and you got a partner show like this and everybody's, clamoring and saying, hey, we want more partner shows, you got to keep hammering the winners here, Luke, huh?
Well, speaking of the winners, I'd be certainly headed back to Lima. If we're talking about hammering winners, I think you'd be headed back to Medellin. But that's probably a different type of winners and a different type of banging. Let's get back on track and let's talk about what Goldman Sachs is doing. We can see here, Goldman Sachs is hammering their kind of winners and they're doubling down on the Bitcoin ETF holdings, surging by 120% in the last quarter. Again, I always like to remind you guys here on the channel, look, it's great that these big banks are buying Bitcoin. It's great that Uncle Larry Fink is pumping our bags. That's what some TradFi bros think. They think the Bitcoin price would be a lot lower without Larry Fink, and that we should even be, quote unquote, getting on our knees to thank Larry Fink. I strongly disagree with that take by some of our, let's keep them unnamed, TradFi Bitcoiners. But what I will say is that, yes, it's great we talk about ETFs all the time, but we always encourage you to buy the real thing, okay? Buying an ETF, it's not Bitcoin. Yes, it's great the banks are buying Bitcoin, but they're not buying real Bitcoin. They're buying BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF, which doesn't have any of the sovereignty that you do get by buying real Bitcoin and taking custody of your Bitcoin. So while we're talking about those two very important things regarding buying Bitcoin, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention or encourage you guys to check out the Bitcoin Well. They're not just another exchange, they're another exchange that actually forces you to take self-custody of your Bitcoin. This is a very important step, and this is why we really love what the guys at the Bitcoin Well are doing. They could make so much money by holding all of the Bitcoin for their users, taking on a lot more risk. But no, they tell you, come use the Bitcoin Well, but figure out how to self-custody your Bitcoin for yourselves. That is a reason why we really respect the Bitcoin Well and why we're thrilled to be partnered up with the guys at the Bitcoin Well. So highly recommend you check them out. You can use a promo code GREENCANDLE and use the link in the description of today's show. You might even get a little bit of a sneaky discount, and you can go into the chance to win 1% of a Bitcoin. That's 0.01 Bitcoin, if I'm right there, Brandon.
Yeah, you can go to the Bitcoin Well, use the bitcoinwell.com/greencandle, and you can get some wishing well tokens when you buy some Bitcoin through the Bitcoin Well. And yeah, you have the opportunity to win 1 million sats. We're giving you guys the opportunity to win generational wealth here on this channel. You can potentially not have to live your life like Luke, where he's got this crazy haircut because he can't afford to get anything else. So get yourself signed up for the Bitcoin Well, get some wishing well tokens, and potentially win that generational wealth.
Yeah, definitely go and get yourselves a haircut, guys. I'm not going to lie. I'm probably due for a little bit of a snip, if I do say so myself. So yeah, check out the Bitcoin Well. Highly recommend what they're doing. I think they're creating a great product. If you do go over there and buy Bitcoin at the Bitcoin Well and you do self-custody your Bitcoin like you should be, I always then also encourage you guys to take that next step when it comes to Bitcoin self-custody, and that is back up those precious 12 or 24 words on something that's actually going to survive the test of time, okay? Those little pieces of paper that they give you in those boxes of hardware wallets, they will not survive the test of time. This is why I always like to encourage you guys to check out what Stampseed is doing. They create a very specialized product that allows you to stamp your Bitcoin 12 or 24 words into titanium, and that will survive the test of time. That will survive house fires. That will survive hurricanes. That will survive floods. So again, check out what Stampseed is doing. You can use a promo code Luke15 to get 15% off anything you want to buy from Stampseed. So take advantage of that discount code and back up your Bitcoin the way it should be secured. Now let's talk a little bit more about the institutions getting into Bitcoin, because it is not just the institutions who are getting into Bitcoin. We're seeing all sorts of other entities get into not only Bitcoin, but also other realms of adoption.